Hi, my name is David Bose. I am the Communications and Marketing Director for Washington Policy Center, and it is great to be here today for Washington Policy on the Go. Every other week, we come to you with our center directors for the latest research and updates on state policy and analysis during the legislative session. It's every week. Outside the legislative session, it's every other week. And today on Halloween, we are here with you to talk about some really key developments in school choice. But before I get to that and to give people a chance to log on, I want to do a couple of brief reminders. One is that at any point during our conversation, you can join us. You can put your question into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and there should be a little Q&A. Yep, there's a Q&A icon right there. You just click it, enter your question, and I try and incorporate that into the interview so that you can get the information that you're asking for. Now you can do that at any time. There's a chat function as well. It doesn't quite work the same. If you want your question answered for sure, just make sure you put it in the Q&A box. I also wanted to call your attention to our blog, which is at washingtonpolicy.org. Elizabeth Hovde was going to be with us today, but she and Todd Myers are both sick today. And she had a really interesting blog about the paid family leave issue, paid family and medical leave. And the reason it's interesting, she's done a lot of work on payroll taxes of late and the impact on workers' paychecks and how, the government officials kind of get this idea, elected officials, hey, we need to do this for other people. And so we're going to mandate this. And then money gets taken out of checks, even in the midst of high inflation, rising prices, shrinkflation. I was trying to point this out with a friend of mine the other day that you grab a package of an item at the store. It's not just that it's a higher priced item, it's the package is smaller. I used ice cream as the example. I was buying my kids, they wanted ice cream. I said, well, we can either stop and get an ice cream cone each of you, or we could go to the store and buy a half gallon of ice cream, and you could have ice cream for the next, 2 or 3 Fridays in a row. And so I was trying to illustrate that point to them. And then I picked up the ice cream, and it's not a half gallon anymore. It's a quart and a half. So not only is it higher price, it's also 25% smaller than it used to be. So anyway, but the paid family medical leave blog that Elizabeth posted points out that the people benefiting the most in Washington State tend to be higher paid individuals. So she broke down the hourly wage estimates from the Employment Security Department, the earnings of people who took the program's tax dollars in the past fiscal year, 2022, summer 2022 through June 2023. So about 12% were $18 an hour or less. 21% were between $18 and $24 an hour. 26% were between $24 and $35 an hour. Between 35 and 61 was another 26%, and more than 61 was at 16%. So the highest bracket is there's more people taking advantage of this program in the highest income bracket than in the lowest income bracket. And Hovde points out that the lower income workers are paying, through their paycheck to subsidize the people with the highest hourly wages. So, they should be able to keep more of their wages for their own needs, but the program is fueled by those employee wages. It's 0.8% of wages this year. It's a doubling of the payroll tax in a short lifetime. I think she also has a blog where it was going down a little bit, but it's still double what it was originally. It requires employers to contribute to the fund, even though many employers already give employees paid time off for sickness or family needs. And the total payment of a worker who made $50,000 in 2023 is $400. And there's a little link there where you can calculate your paid family and medical leave payroll tax on her blog. You just go to washingtonpolicy.org. But that'll be one of the featured items in our Friday email. It's just an interesting note that it's the upper income brackets that are benefiting the most when it comes to this new program. All right, and now I want to turn to, we only have one researcher coming on today. It's one topic, and that topic is education. And to talk about that with us, we have Liv Finne, our Center for Education Director, who's been a little bit excited of late because there's a battle going on and a giant. I think it's fair to say it's a giant shift in there's a lot of negative things happening in the world and in nationally and even locally in our state where people look down and go, gosh, everything's going to hell in a handbasket. What's going on? And then there's this sudden explosion of school choice, parent demanding, more choices, people looking at new options for education. And Liv, you're pointing out that the latest battle could be a sea change if it takes root. Tell us what's happening and why it's important.
Well, I think you put your finger on it. During COVID, parents had the government say to them that they were not going to educate their children anymore. And here in Washington State, there were extended school shutdowns in response to the orders coming down from on high. And parents just looked at each other and said, well, what the heck is that about? I'm paying taxes and they're not educating my children. So I think this was like a message that just hit home to families across the nation. And there has been a real blowback in terms of people pulling their kids out of the public schools. On average, in Washington State's 4%, 46,000 families have pulled their kids out of the public schools. And this is true across the nation. So I have seen now since COVID that there has been a dramatic increase in, there are caring lawmakers in other states that have listened to the complaints of parents and said, all right, you're right. We need to give you some of the money that we collect to educate your child so you can educate your child in the way you see fit. And so in the last 2 years, there have been 10 states that have passed universal school choice programs, giving all families, or nearly all, or 97% of their families, access to public dollars, most times in an education savings account. So families actually get an account funded by the government for the purpose of spending on the education of their child. They can either homeschool or pay private school tuition or buy specialized therapies for their child. If their child has special needs, these education savings accounts get double the amount generally than a student without special needs receives. So this is happening. This is happening right now. It's amazing. So in 2023 alone, there have been 8 states that passed these expansions, and the 2 states before 2023 were in 2022, West Virginia and Arizona. And now we have 8 more states, and this very week, the state of Texas might become the 11th state in the nation to offer universal school choice to all its students. And this is a big deal, obviously.
This is huge, and put it in context. I mean, it's basically like when there's a textbook controversy, whatever California or Texas does is going to have a national impact because of the sheer volume of students in either one of those states.
Yes.
And I take it we could see something similar here where, where it reaches kind of a tipping point. You've got so many students joining this kind of approach that it's bound to, it's going to show parents alternatives. Or, look, if people say, hey, this is going to fail spectacularly, there's no real choice here, there's a lot at stake with this Texas experiment, I think.
It is amazing because this is not the first time the governor there has tried to pass school choice. He has called a special session of the state legislature to pass school choice. And it's a 3-week-long session. It's almost concluded. There's 7 days left to go of this special session. And that state legislature has already passed school choice in the Senate. And now the fight is in the House. And the House is controlled by Republicans, but there's a handful of Republicans from rural districts who are holding out, who may have been supported in their election campaigns by the union, and who are not on board with the school choice platform that the governor, the Republican platform is for school choice in Texas. And these holdout Republicans are under dramatic, increased pressure to follow the lead of their governor and their party, and we'll see what happens. But the very fact that we're having this incredible discussion in Texas is really exciting to me, regardless of what happens, because everyone has now started to think about what it's like if they could get some of their tax dollars back for themselves to educate their children in a private school or to homeschool. I mean, this has blown open the whole notion that we don't have to be forced to send our children to government-run schools. I mean, this is pretty exciting. The idea that we can seize back control over a function of parenthood that is so critically important to the ultimate success of the child. So, you know, even if it doesn't pass this time in Texas, like you said, Texas is very important. There's 5 million school children in the state of Texas. If Texas passes this school choice bill, it will mean that a third of the nation's school children will have access to public dollars to go to a private school. And so just this notion is so new and different and innovative and unleashing the creativity of parents and educators that I can't help but get excited. And then today, on top of what's happening in Texas, today the Washington Post published a very comprehensive analysis that they did of the growth of homeschooling since COVID. Now, we all know the Washington Post is a liberal newspaper. The fact that a liberal newspaper has now reported that homeschooling is the fastest growing portion of education in the nation. They looked at something like 32 states, which represent 61% of the school children in the country, and they found that homeschool students increased 51% over the past 6 years, far outpacing the 7% growth in private enrollment. So this tells you a lot. This tells you so many things. Parents looked at what happened during COVID, they got disgusted, and they said to themselves, how am I going to educate this child who's sitting here looking at me? And they're taking responsibility, and they're saying, how can this be done? And look, we have all these materials online. There are so many fantastic learning and teaching materials online now that a family can certainly take on the education of their elementary school student and then get experts for the higher grades, you know, like the Khan Academy. Everyone's heard about Khan Academy. That is an amazing program. Free lessons in math and science all the way through the end of high school calculus. You can get college level courses, zoomed in to your own home. You can educate your own children now. There's so many resources available online. So it's amazing what's happening. And you wouldn't think that this would come out of COVID, but when you just think about the reaction of the public, you know, being told here in Washington State, we pay $19,000, we spend $19,000 per student on average statewide. Yet the schools are closed for the longest period of time in the nation. We were 47th to reopen. So a parent who has a child who has to learn and proceed in their learning in a steady pace will start to consider their options. And what are they? No?
Yeah, and I think there's so many reasons for this. One is the COVID shutdown. The other is the overreach when it comes to a lot of policies and ideologies that have almost nothing to do with education, or they're tied in usually through some sort of social value that they claim is absolutely necessary. It's like, you know, to get kids to be kind to one another, you have to conform to new, you know, gender ideals and other things that parents are not going along with. When the golden rule of just being kind and polite to people works perfectly well, unless you want to force people into a certain speaking mode. But there's also this, you know, even there's been some very prominent people who've been very successful talking about college kids and focusing on, do you know how much you can learn now online for free so that you're not going into $200,000 in debt for a liberal arts degree? And more kids are picking up on that. I saw, you know, I've met some homeschool parents of late that they spend about 2 hours a day teaching their kids. And I was stunned at how, you know, well-educated the kids are. They're very bright. They're very advanced. There's no, you know, it's not the kind of situation where you're meeting these kids and thinking 2 hours a day, gosh, they're not getting the proper schooling. And instead, you know, they're ahead of their peers in other formats. And I think people with all the, you know, with smartphones and other choices, they're learning that there's just more ways to do something, and they're more open to that than ever before. And I think with school choice, usually the hesitancy, and correct me if I'm wrong, Liv, is it's usually you hear is, oh, but wait, that might hurt our system. It's not, oh, that will hurt the students, because students are getting hurt in the current system all the time. And they'll take 10, 15 years to fix that system, while 10 or 15 grades of students graduate or don't graduate with subpar results that have a lifetime of impact. But when it comes to this, giving parents the individual tools to move on, it's very student focused. It's hard to argue with. That it's just one of those things where it could open up all kinds of possibilities never before thought of.
Well, absolutely. I mean, when you think about the public school system, it was the original design for it was to create workers for the factories. This came from Prussia. This came from Germany. This idea of putting children in a classroom based on age and marching them through the grades, teaching them all the same things so that they can all graduate and work in a factory. That was how the system was designed. It was not designed to develop the individual talents of every child. And so now we've seen over 100 years of working with this very difficult system. It does not deliver excellence, and it underserves children with high needs significantly. So the people who are loudest complaining about the public education system are families with special needs kids, because the system is not set up to provide what these individual children need. And so to let them out of the system, let the families have the resources, the public resources spent on it. I mean, if you start looking at the public system and you think about where the money is going, only half of the employees in the public schools are actually public school teachers. So that tells you how much is being shunted off to non-essential undertakings. The purpose of education is to educate the children, not to teach social and emotional learning to children, not to provide the mental health counseling resources, not to feed them, for heaven's sakes. That's what the superintendent of public instruction's top priority for next session is, to feed every elementary school child food. Please. I mean, it's insulting to have a government tell the parents that they're going to feed your children. Parents are responsible. They feed their children. They take care of their health needs. They take care of their emotional needs. Parents are the best, source of happy children that there is. And so let's help the parents do what they know is good for children. And I mean, I think of this as kind of poetic justice, right? Here we have a very socialized system. That's our government education system. And what these choice bills do is break that up and allow individuals to flourish. And it's a beautiful thing. And if you look at other nations, they have school choices. Sweden passed universal school choice in the 1990s. And the minister of education there famously said, well, education is too important to trust to one provider. And he kind of almost said, especially the government. He didn't say that. But here was the government minister saying, educating our children is so important. Families need to have choices. The government provider, if that government provider is doing a good job, fine. The families will stay with that government provider. But if they're not well served, then why shouldn't the families be able to send their child to a private school that better meets their needs? Or why shouldn't the family be able to homeschool their child? There's just no good reason against it. Of course, like you say, the arguments against it are always to defend the system. Oh, we can't do that. We're going to hurt the system. Well, those are just false. Those are just fear mongering. I've shown in research, if you just look at the budgets of these states that are passing school choice, they pass a school choice program and give families, right now it's been targeted families until this last development in school choice, making it universal. But until then, we had these targeted school choice programs in 32 states that gave deserving families, low-income families, military families, special needs families access to public aid to go to private school. Those states were always increasing funding for the public schools at the same time that they were implementing these choice programs. And that is also happening in these universal school choice programs. West Virginia, Arizona, Florida, Utah, Iowa, Indiana, all these states that are passing universal school choice programs are increasing public school funding at the same time. So it's just a blatant lie to say, oh, it's taking money away from the public school system. It's not. It's giving it to parents. If parents are unhappy, if they're not satisfied, why shouldn't they have the money so they can make sure their child is well educated?
So we have a question from Bruce. He says, unfortunately, using public dollars for private schooling is great until it's used to fund radical Muslim schools training kids for jihad, as was taking place in France. The use of these funds needs to have clear and enforceable guidelines for teaching subjects for general education. We could expand on that. I've heard similar concerns about
Yes.
various religious groups or other things where, people
Yes.
are worried, hey, there'd be too much of that. What's your response?
The response is that's a good concern. That's a reasonable concern. And the response is that the money that is being used by parents to go to a private school, the school would have to be accredited by the state. Okay. So jihad schools are not going to be approved by the state. That's a simple answer to that.
I'd add to that there's been a lot of public universities with all kinds of horrific calls. Those are government funded, and those are kids coming out of the current public education system, and they're saying all kinds of horrific, objectionable, disgusting, anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic stuff at massive rallies. And by the way, and I'll even add, even outside of that, there's been threats and bullying and physical assaults against people like the young lady who's a champion swimmer who's trying to go to schools to say, hey, I think that women should compete against women, biological women only, and and she's getting shut in a room to protect her and assaulted on her way out. So
yeah,
there's a lot of weird stuff happening, and Baltimore schools. I mean, for crying out loud, even without the ideology, there's all kinds of violence going on there. So
it's outrageous. I mean, it really is. I mean, but what do you expect from a government institution? Eventually, the government is going to use it to indoctrinate children in an ideology that the people that are in power like. And this is what we have now. And it's amazing that it sprung out during COVID, because that's what happened in this state. We passed these what they call diversity, equity, and inclusion laws in 2021 in this state, and they are leading to racist, harmful, divisive, bigoted, anti-Semitic lesson plans in the classrooms and in the universities. And that is what we have. I mean, so no wonder parents are pulling their kids out, because the children are being taught to dislike one another on the basis of the color of their skin. And so you can see why a parent would say, hey, not for my child. I subscribe to the American ideal that we are all equal under the law. I subscribe to the notion that we establish this democracy, to avoid that kind of horrible tribal thinking. But now it's here in our state. So I need to save my child from being hurt by this wrong and false ideology. And we'll see what happens in the future. But if the universities don't correct themselves, you're going to see a lot of people deciding to avoid the institution altogether. I mean, it's truly shocking. It's truly shocking. There was a professor at University of Washington justifying the slaughter of innocent Israelis. Okay. I just saw this on Twitter this morning. I mean, there are people that should be fired that are in our higher education institutions, because they are promulgating hate.
Yeah, it's interesting how hate keeps getting redefined, to be, it's used all the time to describe someone who disagrees with you, someone who doesn't approve of you, someone who offends you in some way. And now we're seeing examples of hate as it truly manifests itself, where people are calling for physical violence and death and cruelty inflicted on physical cruelty inflicted on people that are innocent. It's just insane.
And I'm hearing reports that Jewish students are afraid now in these universities.
Okay? Some are locked in a library. I mean, I'd be afraid too, but it makes me want to re-enroll in college because I'm a very big guy, and that's not something I'd put up with right there.
Well, I mean, we have to tell everyone we know that is in positions of power in these universities that they have to start firing these professors that are promulgating hate, and they have to start expelling students that are scaring other students, for their safety. Okay, so this is the time for everyone to put on their big boy pants and big girl pants and say, no, we're not going to have this.
So there's one more question here from Tom. Remind people about the what you said was the cost per child per year. And
Yes.
what and is that the limit? Have we reached that point where they say we're fairly paying for education yet?
That's a great question. The dollar amount in 2022-23 that was $19,000 spent per student on average statewide, which means that in places like Seattle, we're spending close to $23,000 per student. And they increase. So to answer to your question, that number is going up to close to $20,000 this year. And I do not see any limit on that being placed in this state under the current environment, because what happens is there is just the education establishment is extremely skilled at dreaming up new needs for education, like feeding every child, for example, and providing every child a counselor, providing every child mental health support. That's what they're doing now. And they will, all the incentives are in place for them to claim that the schools are underfunded, they need more money. So I have to tell you, until something changes in this state, they're going to get more and more of our tax dollars for education. And they're trying to reduce a number of hours a week of instruction to provide the students at the same time. So it's just astonishing. We'll just have to see. Maybe the people in power will understand they're hurting society with all these high taxes and these bad schools. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, the people have to wake up first and take a look and say, hey, this is not acceptable. This is not what we do. This is,
right.
But I think as these other states start creating alternatives, there'll be other, because people don't know what they don't know. It's kind of like one of the fears I have about some of our healthcare reforms is people talk about our current healthcare system like it's, some kind of free market laissez-faire, thing. And you think of how little, that we've got a third party paying for almost everything. So there's very few cost, control measures going. The government is heavily involved in all kinds of limitations that artificially inflate costs. And people they just don't know what's possible. It's like, when we had the big argument over the phone monopoly, people said, well, if Ma Bell gets, if we allow competition, it's all destroyed. And instead we have, the power of a computer, a scanner, a camera, a video game system, and a home theater in the palm of our hands.
It's amazing. And look what happened. Look what happened during COVID. The American resourcefulness came out. Okay, parents created their own learning pods. They got together with other parents and they educated their children themselves when the schools refused to educate them. And that's basically what these states are now trying to encourage and help and support, is by passing these school choice programs that continues this idea that parents can get together with other parents and returning to the idea of one-room schoolhouses, right? Parents with different age children can actually hire a teacher and or sub out different topics that they can each cover and educate their children themselves. And that's like a return to individualized education, as opposed to this centralized, bureaucratic, unionized system that we have now that's serving no one well. Everyone's unhappy. No one's happy with the public schools. And they continue to go down a crazy, ideological agenda. And that now is making the public distrust the public schools. So they're running into problems because they need to continually get more money. And they need to pass school bonds and they need to pass school levies. And I'm seeing great resistance to this now in Washington State. I have never seen so many people repeating this number, $19,000 per student on average statewide, as I have now. Okay, there are people running for school board trying to change what's happening in their local school districts. There are people fighting these, excessive school bonds that are misrepresented. School districts are misrepresenting the actual true cost of these bonds to property owners. There's just a lot of anger and disillusion with the public school system now, and that is going to have positive effects.
What about when will we know, or do you know when we should expect an answer from Texas as far as, when this debate's going to be decided?
Well, within the next, I think there's only 7 days or something like that. Uh, Only a week left in this special session, so we will know very soon if they succeed or not. But if they lose, if the governor doesn't get what he wants, which is the school choice program, it's not going away. There has been discussions about how these Texas lawmakers that block school choice have got a target on their backs. There are organizations that are going to run opponents against them in the primaries. They're challenging them. So this is a political fight, and it will be played out in the political way, and the people will have their say. And ultimately, Texas will pass school choice because large majorities of the public in Washington, in Texas, wants it, just like they want it here in Washington. But in Texas, there's something like 70% of the public wants it. The Hispanics, the Democrats, the Republicans, everyone wants school choice in Texas, and eventually the legislature will provide it.
So I'm going to read a couple of quick comments, then we'll get to another question here. And government schools, it's from Janice. Government schools are what destroyed education. Ever since the first common school in Massachusetts hundreds of years ago, they've been failing despite continued reforms. You can feel free to comment, or I'll just go on to the next.
Well, I think this is so interesting. So let's think about what they used to talk. When I read that when we were educated during the colonial times, when families pooled their resources to educate their children learned Greek and Latin, and they learned the classics, and they learned a very high level of education. So what does that tell you? Now, over time, the content has been degraded. There's no question about it. So
I was going to mention that earlier, where if you want to know, when people say, hey, schools are better than ever, whatever, just try to go online and pick up one of these books from 100 years ago or even more, and take a look at, say, the grade school tests that they're giving kids. Yes. I mean, I look at them, I think, holy smokes, they had very high expectations of what students could learn, could memorize, what their comprehension levels would be. I mean, there's just no comparison.
Well, of course, that's true. I think in English and history and the humanities. I'm not so sure that's true about math and science. Of course, nowadays we know so much more. But so it's dangerous to make a sweeping generalization. But just the fact that local control actually gets you individualized education, gets you more excellence than you get under the current system that is so standardized. Everything has to be dumbed down to accommodate everyone. And that is not positive, because the people who are, anyway, so, individualized education is how the private schools have delivered excellence in many places. And that is what school choice is going to allow us to return to. It's very exciting.
There's anonymous says, a large UW student rally chant was only one solution with no administrative response. So depressing for a renowned public institution.
It is so terrible what we're seeing on our university campuses, and we should all be ashamed and embarrassed and speaking out against it. I think everyone should stop giving money to these universities and writing the presidents and saying, if this doesn't change, we are going after you guys, because seriously, this is not okay what is happening in our universities.
Yeah. There's a challenge that we have here, which is, well, let me get to this next question here. You and Liz called for censoring and firing people who express opinions about the Middle East with which you disagree, yet you also claim to be in favor of free speech. Isn't that hypocritical?
Well, no.
First, let me say I haven't called for anything yet. I mean, I'm happy to answer a question, but but you go ahead and respond.
Well, this is so superficial. I've heard this argument being made. Obviously, free speech does not include calling for the killing and murdering of innocent babies. All right, that's what these people are calling for. They're justifying the slaughter of innocent men, women, and children. This is just not, that's not contained within free speech. And you should know that.
Yeah, I think that's about all there is there. I mean, it's like, you know, you can't start threatening your fellow students and expect it. And they're not saying something like, "I disagree with the Zionist policy for this, and this reason." You know, there are things being said that are clearly genocidally linked, and that's what
Yes,
horrifies people. It's not a
right.
disagreement about the Middle East.
No.
You know, and I think more effective than anything else is just parents choosing not to send their kids to these places because, you know, there are other options out there. And as we pointed out earlier, there are much cheaper options now. I mean, there's been no downward pressure for various reasons on
Well, I mean,
colleges.
absolutely. I mean, look, just let's talk about free speech some more. There are exceptions to free speech. Everybody knows. New York Times versus Sullivan. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater because that would cause a panic and a harm to physical well-being of the people in the theater. So there are limits to free speech. You cannot call for the killing of people. That is so that's just a simple-minded. Obviously, you have to think this through. It's not wrong to uh, tell people who are calling for genocide that they are not allowed to speak and that they will be expelled from campus because they're calling for harm upon other students in their university. Okay, they're calling for hurting Jewish students. So this is wrong, obviously. And let's just be clear about what's going on here. Uh, anyway, there.
Let,
Uh,
let me jump
that's
to the next question here. This one's from Steve, and I'll handle this one because it's not about
okay.
education leave. He's
Okay.
asking about, hey, what about an analysis of the income tax on capital gains, the amicus brief, and what's happening at the Supreme Court of the United States? Steve, actually, what happens with that is every other week when we do one of these events, every week during the legislative session, Zoom sends out a reminder email, and the reminder email goes out 1 hour before. I actually changed that email and saved it so that it was supposed to reflect that this is a conversation about school choice. But for some reason, I don't know why, the Zoom system sent the old email. And but I did put in the chat function. If you go to your chat function there's two links. That's to our YouTube channel, and one of those links is to the session we did with Chris Corey a couple of weeks ago that describes that amicus brief and provides that analysis for you. So if you just grab those, copy paste them from the chat function, you'll be able to see at your leisure that update on the capital gains income tax issue. Tom asks, will government approved non-public schools be subject to their standards and agendas?
That's a great question. And that is a very valid concern of homeschoolers and private schools that taking government money will mean that there'll be strings attached to that and that their independence will be hampered and that everything will become a government school. But this concern has been alleviated in the new school choice laws, like if you look at Arizona's education savings account that they passed last year, it has an express exemption for homeschoolers. Homeschoolers do not count as school choicers under that law, so homeschoolers are protected. And also, there's an express provision in that law that says that the independence of private schools is not to be tampered with by the government for taking money that the parents decide to use to send to a private school. And that is what insulates these programs from a First Amendment challenge. You'll recall I've written about this. The U.S. Supreme Court has held that because parents decide where the money goes, it's not a violation of the First Amendment establishment of religion clause. Okay, so it is perfectly okay for parents to use this money and put it in a private religious school under U.S. Supreme Court law. And like I said earlier, the only thing the government does is make sure that the schools are accredited, so we don't have Muslim jihad schools, taking money. That won't happen. But private religious schools, Catholic schools will be able to keep their religious program in place and still take these funds, and it's all constitutional. So it's a great avenue for families that feel that values are important to teach in the public schools. And, we've had, the public schools cannot teach religion. So families that feel that religion is at the heart of their family values can now choose to send their children to a school that is consonant with their values. There's nothing wrong with that. It's actually a good thing. So here we go. It's coming.
It is. It'll be really exciting, like I say, to see what Texas does, because that will, with the number of students there, you really create such a huge experiment. There's just so many different options that open up, or the possibilities that open up with a state of that size. It'll be really interesting to see what happens. And I think they've failed in efforts before, so this is by no means a sure thing.
Right.
But it's an exciting possibility to watch for right now.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there's just been a couple of questions about the income tax brief and other things, and I'd encourage people to go to washingtonpolicy.org, then go to the Center for Government Reform, where Chris Corey provides updates on that whenever they're needed. It's easy to access. I've sent it to in the chat section the previous link to the interview that we did, so you can get all the information you need about that. Bruce was asking if we could email a list of states with school choice. Liv actually has that a publication with that, I think, on our education page, an analysis of school choice fairly recently. Am I right about that, Liv?
I've written that's a great question. I've written so many times. I'm not sure I'm up to speed because it's happening so fast. Okay. I have a new blog post. It's coming out not this week, but probably next, that will tally the 10 states and describe those programs in the last 2 years. So stand by, that will be released here soon. And I will, if Texas is in there, I will include it. If not, it won't be there.
Okay, well, that wraps up Washington Policy on the Go for this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Liv Finne, our Director of Education, thanks so much for making the time. As always, we went a little longer than I promised, but didn't seem to wane. A lot of questions to get answered. Looking forward to the next update, which will include Texas, no doubt. So,
great. Thank you.
Keep watch for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
And don't forget, everybody, if you want to view this or any other Washington Policy on the Go, it's on our YouTube channel. Just go to the Washington Policy YouTube channel, and you'll be able to see the latest there and watch them or listen to them at your convenience. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you in 2 weeks.